And in a new development, the All India Council for Technical Education is all set to send a revised fee structure of all engineering and technical institutes across the country. This proposes a minimum and also a maximum fee limit. The maximum fee limit was already proposed 7 years back. That is increased in this particular proposal. The committee has proposed that in case of undergraduate engineering disciplines, the annual minimum fee cannot be below 79,000 rupees, while the maximum has been now capped at 1.8 lakh rupees. Now remember, the revised fee structure really comes 7 years after an expert committee first recommended an upper limit on tuition fee, but there was no minimum limit until now, like I said. The new rules will be implemented from the upcoming 2022-23 academic session. Now, how does it impact these private institutions which are to do with engineering courses and also the other technical courses? To discuss further about this, I am now joined on the broadcast by an expert panel. Furqan Qamar, who is the former advisor of the Planning Commission of India, joins me. Also joining me on the broadcast is Advocate Anubha Shrivastava Sahai, who is the president of India-wide Parents Association. Also joining me on the broadcast is S.S. Mantha, who is a former chairman of All India Council for Technical Education, and Vikram Singh, who is the chancellor of Noida International University, joins me on the broadcast. Welcome all of you on this very special conversation. Now, I will start with you, Vikram. The fact that there is a cap now and a minimum limit for fees that has been now proposed, how does it impact you as a private university, and the fact that the upper limit also now stands increased?
AICTE is the regulatory body and has every right to regulate the fee structure, the curriculum, and the whole gamut of engineering and technical education. But to that extent, I would have been very satisfied if the upper limit was also subject to some kind of a revision and adjustment, because there is a college and there is the college. Like there is a case of a university which has laboratories catering to aeronautical engineering and other specialized engineering colleges that come at a cost. And there are those engineering colleges that cater to the very basic civil, mechanical, electrical, IT, and the like. Therefore, comparison should be between comparables. There is a super specialty college and a university, and there is a basic college. And the spectrum between the minimum and the maximum is so little that perhaps the demarcation has to be very, very clear, that the super specialty university and colleges will have the option of enhancing the fees, subject to the basic fact that the services and the education provided by them
All right, Vikram seems to be traveling. We will go back to him once he is at a stable location. Now, let me take this across to S.S. Mantha, who's the former chairman of All India Council for Technical Education. Now, why this revision now is the big question, because 7 years after that proposed upper limit that was set by the expert committee, it has taken 7 years for this, again, a revision to come in. Why do you think it is important at this juncture?
No, first of all, the first revision started after some of the cases ended up in the Supreme Court, and notably the TMA case and the other references from the high courts and so on. Now, the decision was that there should be a national fee committee constituted. And therefore, that's how the Justice Ranganath Mishra committee was constituted way back in 2008. And in the absence of that, it was also said that the states were free to create their own committees for regulating the fee. And that's how we see state level fee fixation committees and so on. So the work was on from 2008, but till 2012, 13, nothing much happened. And on the when Justice Ranganath Mishra expired, during my tenure, we constituted the Justice Sri Krishna Committee to take that forward. So there were very detailed discussions amongst them with all the stakeholders. And there were representatives from the state governments, there were representatives from the Directorate of Technical Educations in different union territories, and there were also almost all representation was there. And there was a detailed report also submitted during in 2015 based on the work that was done. Now, that committee, like you said, they did talk about the upper limit, but they didn't talk about the lower limit. Now, there is a certain amount of concern when you look at the lower limit to be fixed. There are several state governments have ridiculously low fee because there are reimbursements and there are certain sections of the society provided free education and things like that, and therefore the state governments protested, saying that the fee must be looked at maybe for the upper limit, but lower limit will have to be looked at in a different context and so on. So therefore, that was the problem at that point of time. Now, the several public institutions, they get their reimbursement from the state governments, and once the lower limit is fixed, what happens is they'll have to reimburse that amount to the institutions, and that has a certain burden on the state government's finances and things like that. So therefore, there were issues for accepting the whole in the report and things like that. But over a period of time, AICT has probably got that looked at, and the committee has come out with the lower limit as well. And I personally welcome the move, and they should have been done much earlier. But there are issues which still have, there are concerns, and they must be looked at in the light of implementation of NEP and so on. There is the credit accumulation and things like that. So therefore, things will need to be rationalized.
We will take a look at all of that during the course of this conversation, sir. But let me also just take opening comments from Mr. Furqan Qamar and also Anubha. If you'd like to respond to this particular proposal. 7 years later, however, now there is a lower limit that has been proposed. How do you take it? I'll start with you, Mr. Qamar.
Griha, I see many issues in this proposal. I have not read in detail the proposal that the AICT has sent, but what has appeared in the media, there seems to be a problem. Let me say two things. One is the amount, the other thing is the principle, and the third thing is about the range of the fees. Now, higher education is in the concurrent list. It's shared and the joint responsibility of both the union and the state government. It is true that coordination and maintenance of the standards is in the union list, and therefore the union government and agencies are empowered to do that. But now, coming in terms of the real life and the practical situation, I mean, there are students' interest, there are the interest of the colleges and the institutes, and then there are interest of the states. I think all of these three need to be balanced, and a balanced view need to be taken. So far, the practice has been that in every state, there was a state-level committees for fee fixation. Every institution would send the proposal, or on collective basis, they would decide the fees. Usually, this committee would be chaired by a retired judge, would have representatives from the academics, etc. Now, with this new proposal, there is a minimum fees being fixed, that this is the minimum that you must prescribe. And now, as we saw, the previous speaker was speaking, that there are all kinds of colleges. I mean, almost 50% of the colleges, 50% of the engineering seats in AICT-approved institutions are unfilled up. There are colleges who do not meet the minimum required standards. And therefore, ensuring that they also charge a fees of about 80,000 or 79,000, I think it seems a little unjust. By being in the center, perhaps we may not know all the details and the realities. I think states were in a better position to know about those institutions And those state level committees were better placed and better positioned to determine the fees fixation norms. Second point, I think this idea that if AICT is suggesting this as something which is normative, as a guidance to the fees fixation committee, okay, that may be acceptable. But if it is prescriptive, like this becomes mandatory, I think this tightens the hands of the fee fixation committee at the state level, and it unnecessarily creates another controversy as far as the federalism is considered, as far as higher education being in the concrete list.
Okay.
So I'm not going into the details.
Okay. It's a proposal, Mr. Kamar. So, all right, we're waiting for both the Ministry of Education and also the state to respond, because remember, education is now on the concurrent list. So it's both the state and the center's responsibility to respond to this, and then only it is going to be mandatory. Anubha, your first response on this proposal.
Yeah, I welcome this move, and it was necessary actually. And I would say it's almost 18 years now since the TMFI judgment was announced. Am I audible?
Yes. Please go ahead, Anubha.
So it's almost, it's more than 18 years now since the TMFI judgment was announced in 2004. And since then, state-level committees have been set up in several states. Many states, they have set up these state-level committee for regulating the fees in private colleges, professional colleges. But the committees and state governments have literally failed to regulate the fees in these private institutions. TMFI judgment is very much clear that the educational institutions cannot make profit and they cannot charge capitation fee. But it is happening, and the governments have literally failed to control and regulate the fees. So now AICT has intervened, Education Ministry has intervened. I think all the state government and central government should come forward and regulate the fees in these private educational institutions right from KG to PG. That is what we have been demanding since many years, but that is not happening on ground. And the thing which we demand is that you audit the school and colleges. If the college is saying that no, we want to charge more, then the minimum fixation limit, whatever the minimum limit will be there, which will be fixed. If you want to charge more than that, okay, you are free to do, but you have to justify. You have to get yourself your account audited. The committee and whatever the committee will be there under this regulation or guidelines which are coming, they should ensure that the schools should not charge extra fees for these students, which is happening in past 2 years in COVID. Students are complaining. They are saying that we are not utilizing facilities, but still schools and colleges are charging for hostels, for mess, for several other curricular activities. So high time that the government should intervene and also regulate the fees, conduct the audit of all these private colleges, institutions, and definitely I'm telling you, there is huge
Vikram, would you like to respond to that?
There is huge misappropriation of funds by these private institutions.
Thank you.
They are into profiteering since past many years, and I think it's a good move. And there's a fee regulation act.
Anubha, I'll let Vikram respond to that, because this is something that has been brought to fore time and again. The fact that this proposal 7 years back was actually done so that commercialization of technical education is not really done by private institutes. So I'd let Vikram respond to this.
Absolutely. Commercialization would be the worst educational tragedy that can possibly happen to the cause of education. But I'm in total agreement with Mr. Kamar, words of profound wisdom. And Corona was indeed a great acid test for all of us. But whereas the universities and many colleges exempted the fees and gave, in fact, tremendous advantage to the students. And in my university, at least, we did not insist on charging any fees during the pandemic. But there were also a large number of students who decided to go underground and then get a waiver for an all-time basis. There are gray areas, as Mr. Kamar Sahab has said, that they need to be addressed. Different institutions have different platforms and they need to be addressed accordingly. And the committee should indeed rationalize the system of the minimum and the maximum, depending upon the infrastructure, the quality of the teachers, and the other infrastructure like smart classrooms, laboratory, fieldwork, etc.
Okay. All right, Mr. Mantha, I'd like you to take this. Now, the fact that many such private institutes really reached out to the AICTE and petitioned before it that the state really is setting up really impractical minimum threshold when it comes to the fees. So that was one complaint that you often received. How did it take so long for even the AICTE to actually come up with the proposal, fresh proposal, 7 years? And why do you think it's justified? Why do you think the timing is right now?
No, I mean, a new admission season is coming on. And if a certain fee is revised and notified, it's probably the right time, at least when the admissions are, will take place. But having said that, there are the state
But
level
7 years, sir.
No, I mean, the report was submitted in 2015, and probably the only contention at that point of time was, again, the minimum fee and what the state governments would need to, charge in terms of their own reimbursement and so on. That's a very contentious issue because it affects the state finances and so on. So therefore, unless there is like you said, education is in the concurrent list. And therefore, unless there is a concurrence between the center and the states, the implementation becomes difficult. So probably the delay may have happened in terms of understanding each other's requirements. But having said that, the fee that is charged must look at tuition, development, examination, and others. Now that others is the most difficult to define. Now whereas the accreditation agencies, whereas both within the country and outside the country desire several inputs in terms of quality building in an institution, and every one of those quality aspects they have certain financial implication. For example, internationalization, where our almost 30 odd institutions got a QS ranking this year, they all insist on internationalization, and there is a 10% rating on that. Now, if somebody were to implement that, which means that the institution will need to get people from outside, maybe host them on the institution, on their own, place, and so on. All this costs money. In order to develop labs and things like that, it again costs certain amount of money. So the committee has factored in most of these factors. There were at least 10 different meetings in different places of the country where different stakeholders were taken into confidence, and all those issues were addressed. And finally, the fees that has been proposed is an outcome of all that. Now, there can certainly be differences, and people can argue on both sides. But I believe over a period of time, things will improve. Commercialization must never happen in education, and therefore but having said all that, there is another dimension: the importance that digital infrastructure that is to be taken care of within the institutions today also must be factored in. It costs a lot of money to get in digital infrastructure. And therefore, if all these factors are taken into consideration, the only point that remains is how does one come to fix a rational cost of the education. Now, that fundamentally should depend on the credits. If there are 100 credits to be given for a degree program, how much does each credit cost? If the unit cost can be calculated, then probably that will be the best way to estimate the fees and not get into the semantics and the detailing of how the fee is created and so on. Of course, a credit fee calculation also would need all those conditions. But then if one were to say that a certain fees is 1.85 lakhs or 2 lakhs or whatever, the minute you apportion a certain figure to it, people will start questioning as to why this is required and why that is required. It should be left to the academics and their judgment in order to understand what is quality made up of. Like, so that's what I
Okay,
personally.
all right. Anubha, I'd want you to respond to this since you mentioned about the woes of education, especially during the pandemic and now after the pandemic. Are you, in agreement of these revisions that have been advised? Because for engineering, we are looking at 1.8 lakh, which is the maximum limit, and 79,000 as the minimum fee. So, do you agree?
See, as far as the capping is concerned, the Honorable Supreme Court has already said that fees cannot be capped in private institutions. And the purpose was to stop the commercialization. But commercialization is happening still, in spite of all the regulations in place. There are regulations in place in our country. It's not that this is the first time that the AICT has come up with certain kind of capping. There's regulation in place in all the states for to curb the commercialization in education, but that is not happening because the reason being audit is not happening. If we start auditing all these private institutions, whatever they want to charge, you charge 5 lakh, you charge. You want to charge 10 lakhs or you want to charge 1 lakh, you charge. You have to justify. You have to justify your fees, whatever you're charging from students and parents. So what we demand is that minimum limit should be there. That is whatever the government fixes a minimum limit, like we have in Gujarat. We have a Gujarat Fee Regulation Act for schools, and that got a nod from Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court. Private institutions challenged it. We also went to the Supreme Court, and Honorable Supreme Court gave a nod to the Gujarat Fee Regulation Act, where there is a minimum limit of fee for primary school and also for secondary school. On similar lines, we can do it for even private institutions, colleges. Let there be a minimum limit. Minimum fee should be fixed. And as far as maximum is concerned, if you want to charge beyond that limit, that is 50,000, 70,000, 1 lakh, whatever, then you have to justify your account. You have to submit all your audit details of past 5 years or 6 years or 10 years, whatever will be the criteria in the draft. That is what. If this will be kept in the proper, if this will be demanded, if this the government will come up with such kind of regulation, then the institutions will not be able to challenge it in the Supreme Court. Otherwise, I'm telling you this, again, this will be challenged in Honorable Supreme Court, and all these institutions will drag the case for many years again, which is happening. So let there be minimum fee limit for all the private institutions.
All right, Mr. Kamar, I want you to come in on this. And Anubha also mentioned about the TMA Pi Foundation case in the past, which is the basis of this particular proposal. Now, the court, in fact, ruled at that time also that the state government is going to be deciding the fee structure till there is a committee really advising against it. Until that happens, it's the state's department. Now, do you think because of that also, and because of, again, education being also a state subject included in the concurrent list, there is a lot of intrusion by the state government, and because of which the private institutes are having to suffer? Or do you think it's the other way around?
Well, I think it is about striking a balance between the concerns of the students, of the institutions, and of the state government. Nobody here is arguing for debasement and crass commercialization of technical education. Everybody wants that fees regulation could be an important component in checking such commercialization. The question is that at what level it must be done. Should it be done at the state level or should it be done at the central level? I have a feeling that at the state level, they are in a better position to know about the institution in the states, and therefore their fee fixation committees are far better placed to examine the accounting details and results and all the information that they asked for, rather than having an umbrella fees structure prescribed from the center. Second thing is that if this AICT committee or if the Government of India committee provides a basis for fees fixation committee as to how, as a guidelines or as maybe a mandatory guidelines, which the fee fixation committee should follow in terms of the basis for determining the minima and the maxima, I think that would be a better proposition rather than prescribing a mandatory minimum and maximum amount. In this process, what we are doing is that we are actually promoting more commercialization in technical education rather than curbing commercialization. I think we should also keep in mind that in many states, just 30 seconds, that in many states, they have the fees reimbursement policies for the scheduled castes, for the scheduled tribes, for 50% for OBC categories, and they normally do the ideal fees that their estates prescribe. If you impose a condition where the fees is much more, this may help institution, but would go against students and also against the finances of the state governments. Over to you.
All right, Mr. Qamar and my other guest, thank you so much for joining me on this very, very important conversation. And with that, it's time for me to wrap up this particular debate, an important one at that. But we at